In this video, we're going to look at how to design wireframes in Figma. So Figma is a design tool that you can use for your UX and UI projects. So it's going to work really well for wireframes, and it's also going to work well for polished visual designs. And if you've ever used other design tools like Sketch or Adobe XD, Figma is very similar. So the transition from those other tools to Figma is going to be super easy. If you haven't used any design tools at all in the past, Figma is also really easy to get started with, and this tutorial should be more than enough. So the first thing you want to do is go to figma.com, and then once you're on the homepage, you're going to select Try Figma for free. That's going to open up a pop-up where you can enter your email and password, or you can select the Sign Up with Google option. I personally prefer the Sign Up with Google option. All this does is link your Gmail account to your Figma account, so the next time you log into Figma, you can just use your Gmail, which is one less password you need to remember. So after you signed up, it should take you to this Figma start screen, and we're going to look at that in just a second. But before we do that, we'll go back to figma.com, scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, and then here in the resources section, we're going to select downloads. And this is where you can download the Figma desktop app. It's available for Mac and Windows. Now, what's great about Figma is that you don't actually need to install the desktop app. Figma will run right in your browser and you get the exact same functionality. Although I personally prefer to use the desktop app, I find it runs a bit smoother when you have a lot of different projects open at the same time. But for the purpose of this tutorial, you can use Figma on your browser and it will work just fine. So it's totally up to you. So next we're going to take a look at the Figma workspace. So once you've signed up and logged into Figma, you should see all the design files that are available in your Figma. And by default, when you sign up, Figma auto creates a few files like wireframing in Figma and Figma basics. So feel free to take a peek at those. There's some useful resources in there. But generally, you should see all the design files that you've created. And Figma will actually default to this recent tab here. That's going to show you the most recent files that you worked on. And if you can't find a specific file that you're looking for, what you can do is go here to this left panel, select search, and then you can enter a keyword here. So for instance, tutorial, and the results are going to appear here on the right. In our case, we're going to go back to recent, and then we're going to go to the top right hand corner of the screen and select new file. And we've just created our first Figma file. So the first thing we want to do inside this file is give it a name. So here where it says untitled, we're going to switch the name of that and change it to Butter Academy Figma Tutorial. Awesome, now our file has a name. So now let's take a look at the interface inside each one of the design files. So if we go here to the top left-hand corner, we're going to see our toolbar. So in this hamburger menu here, we have our standard options like file, edit, etc. The nice thing about Figma is it auto saves your work. So you don't always have to come here and hit save. And actually, if I do hit save, Command S on my Mac, there's a message here that says Figma auto saves your work, which is amazing. That's going to avoid a lot of disaster if you're not used to saving your work a lot. If we go back to our toolbar, we can explore some of these tools. So the first one is the move tool. So let's imagine we have an object here on our canvas area, which is this middle area of the Figma file. And now with the move tool, what we can do is select this object and then click and drag to move it around. We'll get rid of that object. Here, the next tool is the frame tool. So frames they usually live inside the canvas, and they're actually kind of the confines of your designs. So all your designs should live inside a frame, and they're really useful to give your designs some constraints. So let's imagine you're designing for an iPhone. Your frame will be the size of an iPhone. If you're designing for a MacBook, for instance, your frame will probably look like that. So we can actually get rid of those frames, and we'll talk about those later on in the tutorial and how to adjust the different sizes of frames. The next tool here is the Shapes tool. And you'll notice that there's a small arrow to the right of the square. If you click on that arrow, it's going to reveal a few additional options. So now you see a rectangle, a line, an arrow, a polygon, etc. In our case, we're going to grab a rectangle and then you can click and drag on the canvas to draw a rectangle. And what we want to do is make sure that rectangle lives inside a frame. So we'll actually just draw a frame here quickly. And then we can adjust the size of this rectangle to the frame. Awesome. Right next to the shapes tool, we have the pen tool. The pen tool is great for drawing custom shapes. So for instance, if we wanted to draw a triangle, we could do that. Just draw 3 points here, close it, and then hit done here. And now we have a triangle. We'll move that up a little bit. And then right next to the pen tool, we have this text tool. So if we click and drag, that just creates a text box, and then you can type whatever you want in here. So you're gonna type Butter Academy. Perfect. And then we have this little hand tool. This is useful if you have a lot of different frames in your file. You can just click and drag to move around inside this canvas area. I typically use the MacBook trackpad for this, or you can use the scroll on your mouse even. It's a little quicker than going back to the hand tool each time. And then lastly, we have this comment tool. This is useful if you're collaborating with other designers. You can just click, write a comment, and then post it, and then all the other designers that are working on this file will receive that comment. If we go here to the top right, there are a few different options that we're going to look at later on in this tutorial, but let's just focus on this zoom option for now. So right now, the zoom of this canvas area is at 100%, but let's imagine you have a bunch of these frames. You have one here, 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 and we wanted to see all of them. What you could do is reduce this zoom to 50%. That's just going to show you more of the canvas. Again, what I typically do, I work on my MacBook, so on the trackpad, I just pinch out and in to zoom in and out, and that's pretty quick too, but you can always use this zoom tool. We'll put it back to 100%. Actually get rid of some of these frames first, and then we'll put it back. Awesome. So here on the left, we have another panel that's defaulted to layers. So if you've worked with Sketch, Adobe XD, or even Photoshop, you're probably pretty familiar with the concept of layers. But what a layer is essentially it represents all the different objects that are on your canvas. So Butter Academy, that represents that text object. Vector 1, that's the triangle. Rectangle 1 is this rectangle here, and then they all live inside of frame 1. So layers are really useful for organizing all these objects on your canvas. Especially when you start grouping things together and your files become a little bit more complex. Layers are really useful. For the purpose of this tutorial and for your wireframes in general, you probably won't be using layers too often, but they really become useful when you get into UI designs and polished visual designs. That's when I mostly use layers. If we move on to assets, here we can see some of the assets that you've created specifically for this file. Right now we don't have any, but we're going to look at that later on in this tutorial. But what you can start doing is creating a library of assets that you can reuse in your design files just to speed things up. And then right next to assets, we have this page option. So as you can see right now, we only have one page. If we want to create another, we just click on this plus sign. That creates another page. The way I typically use pages is just to control the different versions of my designs. So let's imagine I start off with this design here, but then the client asks me for feedback and they want this to be a stroke, for instance. So now I have a version 2 and then version 1, and I can quickly see the history of my designs and go back if I need to, and then I never lose any progress on design. So that's how I typically use pages, but you can really use them however you want to organize your files. So if we move on to this panel on the right, this is our properties panel. So right now nothing is selected, so we see properties for the actual canvas area. So we can change the background of this. If we wanted to make it a little bit darker, we could do that there. But then you'll notice when we select an object, this reveals a few additional properties. So for instance, we can change the alignment, we can change the size, we can change the color. We'll actually do that. We'll get rid of this color and then add a stroke. So we'll look at the different properties of objects and texts later on in this tutorial, but they'll always live in this panel here on the right. And then right next to design, we have prototype. So this is an awesome feature that allows you to link together several screens, so of your website or app, and then users can actually click through those screens as if it were the actual product. And then lastly, we have this code option, which shows you code for each one of the objects on your canvas. And this is really helpful if you're working with developers. They can simply go into your Figma file, select an object, and then copy and paste this code into their code, and that's going to make their lives a lot easier. Next, we're going to look at how to design wireframes in Figma. So for this tutorial, I'll be walking you through a practical example of designing wireframes for a made-up online shoe store called Sam Shoes. And as you can see here, I have two versions of the wireframe. On the left, I have the mobile version. On the right, I have a desktop version. And as we scroll down the page, this is the home page, by the way, for Sam Shoes. You can see that it's very simple. It's a pretty straightforward wireframe, but recreating this wireframe should provide you with all the knowledge and techniques you need to start designing your own wireframes in Figma. Now, the first step of designing wireframes is creating a frame. As I mentioned, frames are containers that your designs live inside. And if you've worked with other design tools like Sketch, Adobe XD, you're probably familiar with the concept of artboards. Now in Figma, frames are the same as artboards. So to create a new frame here in our file, we'll go to the toolbar in the top left, select the frame tool. You can also hit F on your keyboard. And then you'll notice that once you select the frame tool, here in this right menu, under Design, you'll see a few options, including phone, tablet, desktop, watch, paper, social media. And these are all templates for creating new frames. So if we click into phone, we'll see a few common devices here. I'll select iPhone 11 Pro, and that creates a frame the size of a screen of an iPhone 11 Pro. And we're going to keep that frame on our canvas because one of our wireframes is a mobile version. But we also want to design the desktop version for our wireframes. So we'll go back to the frame tool, we'll select desktop, then we'll select MacBook Pro, and that creates a frame the size of a MacBook Pro. So now we have two frames where we can start designing our wireframes, one for mobile and one for desktop. The next thing we're going to do is add a layout grid to each one of the frames that we've created. So I'll turn on a layout grid so you can see what it looks like. It's essentially a series of columns and spaces that help you align objects within your frame. And you can imagine if this grid didn't exist, so I'll turn that off for a second. If you designed 100 of these frames, you'd start losing consistency across each frame because you really have nothing to align objects to. But with a grid, you can simply come here, design a square, and you can choose to align to 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns, 4 columns. And that's pretty much the gist of grids. We won't spend too much time here in this video. I strongly recommend that you chat to your UI designers and developers about grids. They should be able to tell you what type of grid you're using in your UX project, and then you can set your grid specs to those same specs that they're also using in their UI designs or code. Personally, the specs that I use, I'll walk you through those. So we'll get rid of this grid layout for now, and then we'll click on a frame here on the right where it says layout grid. We'll select the plus sign, and then we'll select this icon next to where it says grid. Here where it says grid, we'll change that to columns. I typically use 4 columns on mobile devices. For margins, I typically use 24, so that's the space between the side of the frame and the first column, and then the other side of the frame and the last column. And then for gutters, I typically use 16 pixels, and gutters are the space between each one of the columns. On desktop, we'll also add a layout grid here. So hit the plus sign, change this to columns. I typically use 12 columns. For margins, I use 64 pixels. And then for gutters, I also use 16 pixels. So now we have a layout grid on each one of our frames. Sometimes they can get in the way. Grids are valuable, but if you really want to see what your design looks like, you can definitely turn them off temporarily. And to do that, you click on the frame again, come here where it says layout grid, and you can click on the eye icon, and that will turn off the grid. We'll do the same here. And then if you want to turn them back on, it's the same steps. So you click on the frame where it says layout grid, you hit the eye icon again. Also, a good shortcut for this is Control G, and that turns your grids on and off. So the first thing we want to do here is get rid of the grids that we just created. We don't need them for this step, so I'll hit Control G, and that leaves us with a nice blank frame where we can start designing our wireframes. So these specific wireframes will tackle the mobile version first. In UX, this is a common practice. It's called mobile first design. And the reason that you do this is because most users on web nowadays are actually using the website on their mobile device versus a desktop device. So you really want to make sure that that mobile device is perfect. In my experience as well, I find that it's also easier to solve design problems on a small screen and then adapt to a large screen versus the opposite, starting with a large screen and then having to scale down to a small screen. So I think it's a really great practice to start with mobile, and that's what we'll do in this tutorial. So we'll grab our mobile frame here, move it off to the side so we have space to work. And then what you can do here with your frame selected is pull on the bottom, and that will make the frame larger, give us plenty of space to work in. And now the first step to designing wireframes, the first step that I do is define the different content blocks that will exist in your wireframe. This gives you a nice outline to work with, and you're not just improvising the whole time. You have a nice skeleton of what content will appear in your wireframe. So remember, we're designing an online shoe store, and these are a few content blocks that I've marked off. So to define each of these sections on our wireframe, what we'll do is start off with a rectangle here. I'm using the rectangle tool. You can also hit R on your keyboard, and then we'll start drawing each one of these sections. So this one will be for our menu. Here in the fill section, we can make that a little bit darker. And then we'll grab our text tool and we'll add a label. Can't see it right now, so I'll change the color of that to white. And now we have our menu section. The next section that we want to outline here is the promo area section. So what I'll do is select both of these items. I'll hit Alt on the keyboard and just drag this down. And that makes a copy of what you selected. Make this a little larger. We'll probably have an image for our promotion area and a big headline, so we need some space there. And then I can drag this title down, change this to promo area, and then we'll make the color of this here where it says fill, we'll make this a little lighter, so I can actually change that to 90%. The next section is categories. So again, I'll make a copy of this. We probably need just as much space. I want this section to be white, so I'll change the fill of that to white, and then the text I'll make dark, and then we'll change this title here to categories. The next section is the product section. So I just made a copy there, change that to product. Now we have a mailing list section. And then the last section here is footer. So I'll actually grab the menu. I just copy pasted there, bring this up a little bit. Footer, and we'll make that a little larger. Awesome. And then what we can do now is make the frame smaller so it fits perfectly aligned with our content. And now we have the different content blocks that will exist in our wireframe. And now once I've defined these, what I like to do is I'll actually delete this, bring this over. I'll zoom out so you can see, oh, we lost our footer here. Actually paste that in our frame, bring that all the way to the bottom. Now what you want to do is select all of this content that exists in the frame, and then we'll drag that over to the right. And then I just want to select the rectangles here, not the text. Make that a little smaller so we have some lines here. And then just select the text change that to white here in the selection colors. Now we have a nice outline of all the content that will exist in our wireframe, and we can use this as a reference as we're designing over here in the frame. So what we can do now is start designing our menu here in our wireframes. So I'm going to turn our grids back on, remember Control G. And the first thing we want to add to the menu here is a logo. So if I go over to the resources section, I already have a logo design, so I'm actually going to grab that here. And I can copy and paste that right in the wireframe. I'll place that here in the menu section. Now one note, if you're starting your wireframes from scratch and you don't have a logo, what you can do, I'll get rid of this for a second, is just draw a rectangle. And then you can take your line tool here and draw a few diagonal lines through it. Draw another one. Make sure those are aligned to the corners. We can actually change the colors of this. Make this a bit darker. And then the lines can be white. And this is a pretty conventional way to denote that there are placeholders in your wireframes. So if you don't have images or logos, this is a good way to say this will be a placeholder for an image. In our case, we do have a logo, so I'll actually get rid of the placeholder and I'll put the logo back in. And now a few more things that we want to add to this menu is a hamburger menu. So I'll go over here to the resources section. I have a couple icons that I'll grab. Paste them here. And the first thing we'll do is include this hamburger menu. Now hamburger menus usually open up a full screen menu or a side menu with all the menu options. Change the color of this to black so you can see it. And then to make this a little bit smaller, this feels a little too large right now. I'll actually hit K on my keyboard. That's the same as the scale tool here. And you can scale the icon down proportionally. And then we'll go back here to the move tool. And that feels like a better size. And again, as you can see here, I'm aligning to the grid that we created earlier. So it's just right here, right before the space, the margin. And I will add these other icons here, the search icon and the shopping bag icon. Remember, we're designing an online store, so these are really important for finding products and keeping track of products that you've added to your basket. So I'll change the color on these as well. And then we can copy and paste them into the frame. And I'll grab the scale tool again. I'll make these slightly smaller. And now with icons, it's important that they're more or less the same size, especially if they're used in the same element. Like here, it's a menu. It's important that all of these icons feel consistent and the same size. So we'll do that. Move this a little bit closer together. And now we have all the elements of our menu. Now one note here with the icons, if you can't draw icons from scratch, obviously it can be a little bit tough, and honestly it's a pretty big time investment. What you can do is use this site that I typically use called the Noun Project, and the Noun Project is a great resource for icons. They have pretty much everything you can think of here, and then when you do find an icon, all you have to do is hit get this icon. It'll give you a few options: pro download, basic download. I usually use basic because I'm creating wireframes and they're usually internal facing, meaning that I'm not publishing them online. They're just going to be reviewed by clients and coworkers. And then the actual final icons in the designs, you can use the pro download, which is where you get the royalty-free licensing. So yeah, basic download, that's going to work just fine. Once you select that, you can choose from PNG or SVG. So PNG will give you an image file, and then the SVG will give you a vector. I usually work with vectors just because if we go back to Figma, when you work with a vector, you can scale it as large as you want and it doesn't lose quality like an image. And the nice thing about vectors too is you can change the color of them in Figma. So here in the noun project, you always want to stick with SVG when you download your icons. The next part of the design that we'll focus on is the promo area. So in this promo area, we'll be calling out a new shoe that was just released on Sam's Shoes. We'll have a nice image of that shoe, a headline, some body copy about that shoe, and then a call to action that links users to a product page where they can actually configure their shoe and add it to their shopping cart. So let's get started by adding the headline. I already have that headline written out over here in the resources section. So I'll copy that, paste it here to the left of the frame, and then we can start including this in our wireframe. So the first thing we'll do is select the text tool. We'll draw a text box, and we can start writing out this headline. So built for flight. Go ahead and center this. And now we can choose a font for our headline. So over here in the right panel where it says text, we'll just click on this drop-down menu and we'll see a bunch of different fonts, some from our computer and then some that Figma provides from sources like Google Fonts. So I really like to use the font Montserrat, so I'll go ahead and select that one. And then let me just align this to the center of the frame. The next thing we want to do is configure the size of the headline. So right now it feels a little bit small, so we can actually change this from 24 points to 60 points. And then you'll notice that the space between each of the lines is pretty excessive right now. So we'll go ahead and reduce that to 60 here where it says line height. And then we can also reduce the letter spacing, which is the spacing between each letter here in the right panel as well. So we'll make this -5, just so it feels a bit tighter. Now we can do the same steps and add our body copy. So text box. I'll actually just copy and paste this. I think it's in white right now, so we'll change that to black. Center it, and then center it on the frame. And then the font I'm using for our body copy is called Poppins. That feels right. I'll change the weight of that font though from regular to medium. And then the line height, we can actually make this 28. And then the spacing between the letters is fine, I think. So now we have our headline and body copy. A good trick here in Figma when you're working with text elements is creating styles for each type of text element. So let's say we have our headline. What we can do now is click these 4 dots here on the right, add a text style, and call this header 1. And then we can do the same for our body copy. 4 dots, +sign, body copy. And now if we create a new text box, add some random text in there, you can just switch between the styles that you just created. So I'll break this style, click the 4 dots. If I select header 1, it's gonna look like our header 1. And then if I select body copy, it'll look like our body copy. So this just speeds up the wireframing process as you add multiple text boxes to your frame. The next thing we'll add here is a call to action. So I'll just draw a rectangle, resize that, center it on the frame, make this dark, and then we'll add some text to our call to action or button. So I'll just go ahead and copy this, change the color to white, and you'll notice that you can't see it right now. All that's happening is the text is behind this rectangle we just created. So a good trick to bring it to the front of the frame is right clicking and selecting bring to front. That just brings it in front of the rectangle, and then you can go ahead and edit the text. So in this case, we'll change this to shop. And it's very important that the text that you include in these call to actions or buttons is very clear. It should describe what users are doing next. So in this case, they'll be shopping for this new shoe model. So that's very clear. And once you have both the text and the rectangle for the button, what you can do is select both elements, right click, and you can do group selection. So now when you click on
this element, you can just move it around, and both the text and the rectangle move together because they're a group. Another thing that you can do too is make it a component. So if we right click and then select create component, you'll now notice that when we go to this assets panel that we looked at before, there's a new component here, and that's for our call to action or button that we just created. So if you ever need a button on this same page or on a different page, you can just go ahead and drag the style right into the frame, and that creates the same button style that you used up here. And you can even change the text of that. So let's use test, for instance. And then if you have to make changes to this button, you just go to the main component. This is the master component. And let's say you wanted to change the color of it to purple. It changes across all buttons, which really speeds things up if you have to make changes across all your wireframes. In our case, we'll change that back to black and get rid of this test button. The last thing we'll add here to our promo area is a hero image of this new product. So I already have an image here in my resources file. I'll select this shoe here, paste it on the frame, and then I'll change the color of that to black. And then because the headline talks about built for flight and it being a really light shoe, we want to create the impression that the shoe is like flying. So what we'll do is rotate this by selecting the corner of the object, just dragging. And then we'll make this a little bit larger. It can actually be coming off the frame a little bit. Move this down. And then we'll add another shoe. Right click to flip it horizontally. And then we'll make it larger so that it looks like it's closer to us. And we create this illusion that the shoes are kind of like floating here. Move this up a little bit. This can actually be a little bit smaller. Perfect. So now we have our hero image, headline, body copy, and call to action. The next section that we'll be working on is the category section. And this is going to be a really simple section where we link to women's shoes and men's shoes. This is really helpful for users because when they first land on the Sam Shoes homepage, if they only want to see products for women, they can do that by clicking the women link. If they only want to see products for men, they can do that by clicking the men link. So that's what we'll be designing here. Again, we'll keep it super simple. So let's use the rectangle tool. And we'll draw a square here that's aligned to the 4 columns of the grid. It's a little too small, so we'll stretch that out a little bit. And then we can change the color of this square to black. And the way that I see this working is you could have like a really nice image here as the background and then some text overlaying the image. So we'll add that text here in the wireframe. Just copy the headline. Change the color to white so you can see it. And this feels a little too large for the space we have to work with. So what I'll do is break this header 1 style that we created before. And then we can actually reduce the font size to about 40. Change this text to women. And then left align it here. And then as you can see, the space between the letters feels a little bit tight for this size of text. So what I'll do is actually increase this to 0 and then just close this text box a little. And then what we can do now too is just as we did with the header 1, we can create a new text style and we'll call this one header 2. So I'll go here to the text section, click the 4 dots and the plus sign, and then just call it header 2. Bump it down, actually bump it up a little bit. And now let's create a little call to action within this block as well, just so it's clear where users are going when they click on this block. So I'll make a copy of this. We'll change the style to body copy, and then we'll change the text to shop now. And then what we can do is add an icon to this text. So I have one here in the resources page. Copy that, and then paste it right next to shop now.
And then with the scale tool, I'll scale this down proportionately so that it matches the height of the text. Awesome, that feels a lot better. So now we have a category for women. Let's create the same style of category for men. So I'll just select all of these elements, use Alt and drag to create a copy, and then you can simply change this title to men. We can actually turn off the grid to see what that looks like. That feels good. And if you notice here, our labels, they're starting to get a little bit, the categories is way up here, promo areas here. We can just bump those down actually, so they still make sense. But these are really just for reference, so you know what you're designing at each section. All right, so let's move on to the product section. This is where we'll show new releases on Sam's Shoes, and then also the top products or the most sold products. So let's give this section a title, copy this, change the color to black. And we can actually turn the grids back on to make sure everything's lined up. And we'll call this new releases. That feels a little bit too big, so what we can do is break this header to style and then reduce it from 40 to 30. The line height can go down to 40 as well, in case you have 2 lines. And that's feeling a lot better. So now let's add in some placeholders for product images. So we'll use the rectangle tool. We can create a square that's about 3 columns. And then we'll bump the opacity of this square down to about 50%, just so it's not so intense. And then we'll add the name of the product below the image placeholder. So in this case, product name. That's way too big, so we'll actually make that body copy. Break this style. Make the weight of that bold, just so it stands out a little bit. It's actually too much, so we'll make that semi-bold. And then we'll add the price here as well, 186 Canadian, and then regular. Perfect. And now what we could do is simply stack these products here vertically. The problem with that is it would take up a lot of real estate on our homepage, and real estate on our homepage is precious. So instead we'll use a carousel interaction here. In other words, will allow users to swipe through products horizontally. This is a pretty common practice, but we'll make it super clear for users by adding an additional affordance here. So I'll use the rectangle tool and just draw a little slider bar. We'll make that the same color. I'll grab this color dropper as this product placeholder, and then just copy paste this to show an indicator of where users are. So that way, as they slide through the carousel, this will just move this way. And once they reach the end, this will reach the end. Perfect. And we can actually use this same design for our top kicks section, which are the most sold products. And then we can turn the grid off to see how that looks. It's looking pretty good. We'll just bump these labels down. So let's move on to the mailing list section. And the first thing we'll do here is make our frame larger. We're running out of space. So to do that, we'll go all the way to the top, select the title of the frame, and then you can drag to make it larger. Now it's very important that you hold Command on Mac or Control on Windows when you drag. Let me show you why. So if I zoom out and I don't hold Command, you see how the arrows move there next to Shop Now. So Figma has a way of, when you resize frames, sometimes the objects in that frame can move. So I'll just do undo. But if you do Command and then drag, nothing moves. Or Control on Windows, that will work too. So that's just a trick for resizing your frame. And now we can start designing the mailing list section. So I'll turn
the grids back on. And this is a pretty simple section as well. Essentially here we're just calling out for users to sign up to the mailing list to get, weekly or monthly updates about new shoes, new products, promotions. So the first thing we'll add to this section is a title. I already have all this copy written out here in the resources section. So I'll copy that. And the title in this case is Never Miss a Drop. So if you're not familiar with shoe jargon or shoe lingo, a drop is when a new shoe model drops. So we're speaking to the users in a language that they're familiar with. So I'll change this to black, center it, and then we can change the headline style to header 2, should look good. Now you'll notice there's some excess space here, so we'll actually go in and edit the header 2 style. So to do that, we'll click on header 2, and then you'll see these little configuration icons next to text styles. We can go ahead and click that, and then reduce the space to, let's try 50. Actually, we can even go 40. That feels tighter. And we'll center that in the canvas. And you'll notice we're using header 2 up here. There was some slight adjustment when we changed the line height, so we can actually just move this down a little bit. That looks great. We'll bump this up slightly. And now let's add some body copy here. So I'll copy this one here, paste it right below, and I'll copy my text here. It's a little too wide, so we'll make that a little smaller and then center it on the frame. You'll see that the option is blocked. That's probably because the text isn't properly copied on the frame. So I'll just cut that and then paste it again. And these are working now, so we can center them. Just bump that up. And then the last thing we need for this section is another call to action. So I can just copy this call to action we have here. This is more of a secondary call to action. I think that the main one on this page should be this primary call to action that links users to this new shoe model. Signing up for a newsletter is secondary. So what we'll do is actually change the style of this. So remember, we made this a component. So the first thing that we want to do is detach instance. So that makes sure it's no longer associated with this component, and we can change it without affecting anything. So I'll change the text to black, and then I'll select the rectangle, and what I'll do is get rid of the fill and then add a stroke. We can make that 2 pixels just so it's a little thicker, and then we'll change the copy of this to join mailing list. We can group that. We can go ahead and make it a component, create component, and that's your secondary button style now. So that's our mailing list section. And the way this would work is when users click on that, it would open a pop-up. We're not going to design that pop-up right now, but that's something to think about when you're designing your wireframes, what each interaction looks like, and then you should also design for those interactions. So the last section that we'll design here is the footer section. And now footers usually live at the end of every page on your website, and they offer valuable links that are relevant to the users. So you can imagine this is an online shoe store. So a few examples of valuable links might include things like shipping information, returns, sizing. You might have some links about your account, some links about Sam's shoes, and then a bunch of legal stuff like terms of use, terms of sale, privacy policy, etc. So I'll go ahead and copy these links. I already have them predefined. Paste them outside of my frame here. And then we can start including them in the wireframe. So the first thing I want to do actually is use the rectangle tool to draw a background here for a footer, just so it's a little bit separate from this mailing list section. And I'll make that darker, put it all the way to the bottom, and we can start including these links here. So I'll grab some body copy, change the color to white. Looks like it's behind the rectangle,
So we'll use that trick again, bring to front. We want to left align this. And we can start writing out some of these links. So sign in, register, order status. Just make that smaller. And this actually feels pretty big for a footer link. It might compete with the content up here. So let's make these a little smaller. We'll break this style, bring them down to 14, and we'll make a new style here called footer links. And then we can make this the size of about 2 columns. So we'll do the same over here. We have shipping, returns, sizing. I'll actually copy both of these. I can actually go ahead and copy this text too. So paste that, copy this, paste that. And then let's add a title to each one of these columns. So I'll just make a copy of this. This section would be called My Account. And to differentiate it from a link, we can actually change the color. So I'll use one of these grays here. Maybe something even darker. Oh, way too dark. This feels better. What you can do is knock down the opacity too. So I'll knock it down to 50. We have My Account, help, copy both of these, drag them down. So these titles are about and legal stuff. You can actually play with this spacing too. Just knock these down a bit and then bring everything up. Awesome. So the next thing we might want to add are some social media links. So we can put follow Sam's here as the title. And then I have some social media icons here in my resources page. You can probably find these online. Just search Figma social media links, and you should find some templates that you can use or assets. And then with all 4 selected, I'll use the scale tool and just scale these down. That feels like a good size. And I'm running out of room here, so what I want to do is go here to the top, make my frame a little larger. Oh, scale tool still selected. So I have Command pressed as I make this larger. You can use Control on Windows. I'll make this slightly larger as well. And then let's wrap up the footer by adding this 2020 Sam Shoes Inc. All rights reserved. So paste that. Still have my footer link style. What we might want to do though is make this smaller. So let's break this, take that down to 12 even, and we'll reduce the opacity to something like 25. It's a little too dark, so maybe 40. Awesome, and let's bump this down a little bit. Oh, looks like it's selecting. Get rid of these. So we can bump all this down. Actually bring this up. And then we'll go back to the top and just adjust our frame size here. Awesome, so we'll turn off the grid to see what it's looking like. There's our footer. Can even maybe bump these down. We have all the other sections designed out too. So now that we wrapped up the mobile version of our wireframes, we can move on to the desktop version. And I actually designed this out already, so I'll just zoom out here. I'll bring over the desktop version.
and we can compare both side by side and just call out some of the notable differences on the desktop version of the wireframes. So the first thing we're going to look at is the menu. As you might notice, on the mobile version, we're using the hamburger menu to kind of collapse all of our menu items. On desktop, that's really not necessary. We have all this horizontal space, so we can actually just show the menu items here in a list format, or side by side, should I say. In terms of the logo, it stays exactly the same. We're just centering it on the frame. On the desktop version, it's a little bit larger just because we have more space. And then here on the right, the search and shopping bag stay exactly the same. If we move on to the promo section, so here you'll notice that everything is stacked. We have the image first, then the text, then the call to actions. On the desktop version, again, we have more horizontal space, so we can actually just align the text and the call to action to the left here, and then use this space to have a nice big hero image of the product. If we move on to the next section, the categories, we'll actually turn our grids back on so you can see what's happening here on the desktop version. So on the mobile, I was stacking each block, but on the desktop version, we have a lot more space. So what we can do is use 6 columns of our grid for each block, and that will split up the screen in half. So we have women and men. And the only really other subtle nuance here is that I bumped up the size of this text here where it says shop now. We have a lot more space on desktop, so I figured that could be a little bit larger. That's really not the case on mobile. Everything feels like a little bit smaller and more compact, and that feels good there. If we move on to the next section, you'll notice the interactions are still the same. We're still using this carousel to reveal different products. The only main difference on the desktop version is we're just showing more cards right off the get-go. So here we have 4 product cards and then 1 more card peeking, whereas on mobile we only have 1 product card and then a peek card here to the right. You'll also notice how I'm using the grid here. So each one of these product cards takes up 3 columns on the grid. And then if we move on to the mailing list section, this one actually stayed exactly the same. What you could do in your UI version of these designs is just include something to fill the space here on desktop. So this might be an image or some sort of graphical element, but for wireframes, for UX, this is just perfect. And then the last section here, our footer, same deal. All I'm really doing is just taking advantage of this horizontal space. So instead of stacking each one of these columns, I'm just using 2 columns for each little section of footer links, and then 2 more columns for the social media links. And I'll zoom out here, turn off the grids, so you can see a final side-by-side view of both wireframes. And I will call out that here I've only done the mobile and desktop version. In your projects, you might want to do the tablet version as well. It really depends on how much your designs vary from device to device. So if you're finding that this interaction here is radically different on a tablet, you want to make sure you're designing wireframes for tablet, just so your UI designers and developers know what's going on across all devices. Another great feature that Figma offers is present mode. So present mode lets you see what your designs look like without all of this Figma interface around them. So to enter present mode, all you have to do is select a frame and then hit the play button here in the top right corner. And that will actually show you your designs at 100% zoom without the Figma interface. And I use this all the time. It's really nice to get a feel of what your designs actually look like at 100%, because oftentimes I design at about 40 or 50%, and it's hard to get a sense of if the sizes are right, if this is too big, if this is too small. So when you come over here to present mode, you can actually see what your designs will look like and how users will experience them. It works on mobile as well. So if you select your mobile frame and then come to present mode, it shows you those mobile designs at 100%. And then what's really cool on Figma is you can actually choose a device to present your designs in. So if you don't select any frame at all, you go here to the right panel, select prototype, and then here in the device section, I'll select the iPhone 11 Pro. And now when I go to present mode, my design will actually appear inside an iPhone 11 Pro. This is a nice feature. It gives you a sense of what your designs look like in an actual device. And then I actually use it when I present to clients. It's just a more polished way to present your designs. Another cool feature that Figma offers when you're designing for mobile is the Figma Mirror app. So it's available for iOS and Android. And essentially what it allows you to do is if you go to Figma, you select this frame here, for instance, this whole frame will actually appear on the Figma Mirror app on your mobile device. So the way I use it is I have that app open side by side, and as I'm designing, I can actually see what this looks like on my phone. And it's a really useful feature. Again, it's nice for seeing if things are the right size. What might feel right over here on your desktop computer will maybe be too small or too big on your mobile device. So I actually just keep both apps open. I have my desktop one and the Figma Mirror app open on my phone, and I just design that way with both open side by side. So now let's look at how to share your designs in Figma. So let's imagine you're done designing, you're done with your wireframes, and you want to share them with a coworker or with a client. How do you do that in Figma? Well, there are a few ways to do it. The first is by exporting. This is a really quick way to share your designs. And the way that exporting works is if you don't select anything here on the canvas, go to the right panel, and here where it says export, just hit the plus sign, and then you click the export button, and all this does is export the whole canvas area. So you can imagine right now we have 2 frames here and these labels. The export will actually be this area right here, just so you can get a quick overall vision of all the designs available on this page. If you want to export one frame individually, so let's imagine someone asked you, oh, what did the mobile wireframes look like? And you want to share this with someone, you just click on that frame, go to the right panel, select export again, and then it gives you a few options here. So you can actually choose from PNG, that's the default version, and it'll just export to a PNG image. You can choose JPEG as well, or you can even choose a PDF. I tend to export in PDFs, and what's nice about that is you can go and merge them together afterwards and share all your designs in one file. Figma actually allows you to export multiple frames as well. So if you want to share both of these, just select those, go to export again, hit the plus sign, choose your file format, and then it will export both of these frames individually. Another way that you can share your designs here on Figma is with the share button here in the top right corner. And this will give you a few options. So the first thing you can do is enter an email here and then choose what kind of access that user will have to this file. So if it's a client, for instance, you probably want to leave it to can view. But if it's a coworker that's going to be collaborating with you and designing at the same time, you might want to change that to can edit. And that way that user can actually come in and edit these designs with you simultaneously, and they have the same access as you. Also in the share pop-up, if you look at the bottom where it says copy link, this is a really quick way to share this file as well. So what it does is copy a link to this Figma file, and then when someone clicks on that link, this whole Figma file will actually open up in their browser. They don't even need to log into Figma or download the Figma app. It just opens up right there. That's also a pretty quick way to share your designs with a coworker, for instance, who's just curious of how your wireframes are looking. They can quickly open that up in their browser. They don't need to install anything, which is a huge benefit of Figma. The last thing we'll look at are the collaboration features on Figma. So as I mentioned before, Figma is amazing for collaborating with other designers, especially if you're working on a big team, people are working remotely. Figma offers some really cool features when it comes to collaborating. So the first thing that you want to do if you're collaborating with another designer is here in the share pop-up. As I mentioned before, if you enter someone's email and then give them edit access, they can actually jump in on this file and start editing these designs with you. And what's really cool about Figma is you can actually see that person's cursor moving around, and you can see the changes that they make in real time, which is amazing if you're collaborating with a lot of designers. You can actually jump in on the same file together and design together. You don't have to worry about sending each other files through email, which can get really messy when it comes to different versions of the design.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to do our full UX design course, there's a link in the description below for that. The course covers the entire UX design process, including research, information architecture, prototyping, and user testing with video tutorials just like this one. Thanks for watching and see you in the course.